Hello and welcome to the formal review. Today, we will be having a very special episode. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the formal review. This is season 3 episode 9 and I thank you all for tuning in once again. So for those who are not aware, this past week on April 22nd was Earth Day. So to celebrate, I put a poll out across all my social media platforms asking for a non-documentary film to watch or rewatch and then review. I may continue doing this on a monthly basis for films that I have never seen around some sort of holiday that takes place that month. I'm not really sure, but I thought I'd at least try this out and see how it went. Options this month were Snowpiercer, Okja, Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, and Beasts of the Southern Wild. I do want to give a shout out here to everyone who I know who participated this time around. Andre from Backseat Directors, Meg, Justin, Tom from Maddie B's Movie Gang, Parker from Closed Caption Reviews, Ben from Indie Gem Films, Alan aka Movie Buff 237, and ratings voting I think all the way from Belgium. If I did miss you, I apologize, and if I do this again, I'll get you on the next vote-in review. Thank you all again for participating, and now on to the movie review. Now before I get started, I do want to preface this episode with a slight spoiler warning. As always, I will do my best not to ruin the movie for you, but I do suggest you see the film before hearing what I have to say about it, so you fully understand everything. In this episode, at the end, I will be going into the conclusion of the film and its meaning. However, this film has been out for about 6 years, so you really have had time to see it. There will also be some intense ideas that this film deals with and my thoughts on them, so if you have any issues with that or any potential spoilers, I suggest you stop right now. However, if you don't care or you just want to hear my thoughts on the film, keep listening. So this vote-in review film is... Voting isn't just going to the polls anymore on election day. Options like early voting, mail-in voting, and ballot drop boxes are available to more voters and are growing in popularity. How to Vote is a tool created by Democracy Works, and it breaks down the options your state offers by forecasting a ballot, empowering you to decide where and when to vote. Democracy works best when we all vote, but misinformation and confusion about election procedures have resulted in low voter turnout. How to Vote takes the guesswork out of the voting process. It is easy to use and helps folks from all over the country overcome many of the process barriers to voting. It is committed to helping you vote no matter what. You can use the How to Vote tool to sign up for election reminders, see what's on your ballot, get step-by-step assistance requesting your mail ballot, explore your options for returning your mail-in ballot, check your voter registration status, and find your local polling site and make sure that you have an appropriate ID to bring with you. Decide when and where you'll vote this year at howto.vote. Snowpiercer. It is a science fiction action film based on the French graphic novel Les Transperceniers by Jacques Loeb, Benjamin Legrand, and Jean-Marc Rochette. I really apologize if I mispronounced any of that. For anyone who's listening who knows the French language, it's not my first language, so I apologize right now. Furthermore, any of the Korean pronunciations, I also apologize for that for anyone who is Korean who may be listening. The film is directed by Bong Joon-ho and was written by Joon-ho and Kelly Masterson. It was produced at a budget of $40 million and it still remains the most expensive Korean production ever. It stars Chris Evans, Sung Kang-ho, Tilda Swinton, Jamie Bell, Octavia Spencer, Go Ang-sung, John Hurt, and Ed Harris. The movie takes place aboard the Snowpiercer train operating on a globe-spanning track carrying the last remnants of humanity after an attempt at climate engineering in order to stop global warming has unintentionally created this snowball Earth. Evans plays Curtis, a member of the lower-class sales section passengers who leads a revolution against the elite members of the front of the train. Going into much more of the plot would be spoiler territory, so I'm not going to go into that now, but I will be touching on a little bit of it later. I hadn't seen this film before, so I was kind of excited. I really enjoyed Parasite, so I was really looking forward to seeing more of Joon-ho's work in film. It was one of my favorite films of the past year, and so I really wanted to watch more of his films. I will say, looking at this movie, it seems very stereotypical of a action movie, and it starred Chris Evans, who now has become known as Captain America. I was anticipating it, but it wasn't on my top list of films. But when I googled what movies can you watch on Earth Day, this was one of them. So I put the poll out there. So after watching it, I do feel that the plot is very engaging and very unique. It is able to be very interesting from beginning to end, and it touches on a lot of mature themes, of which I'll go into later. But it is so enjoyable because it is a fairly really easy story to follow. But after seeing the end and a second viewing, it shows that there is a more complex story going on, and they allude to that multiple times across the course of the movie. Again, I will go into that more later. The pacing is very appropriate, and the fight scenes are surprisingly good, which I really didn't expect from this film. Last year's Parasite was obviously more dialogue based, so I really wasn't expecting really fun fight scenes. I think visually, Joon-ho is able to make each part of the train feel interesting and unique as well. To make each car and scene feel unique is impressive as it is, but then to do this in this tight environment shows phenomenal filmmaking. The most impressive sequence is when the people on this train have to fight each other in a completely dark car, and the viewers get to watch this through a pair of night vision glasses. The writing, for the most part, is also really well done. When somebody says, "I know what people taste like, and I know babies taste best," viewers don't look at this person really as a villain, because this film has built them up over the course of the movie. And weirdly, they end up having the audience feel for them and feel sad. Not that they know what that's like, but the fact that the character has had such a hard life. Not the fact that this character has eaten babies before. So this, I think, really adds to the complexity of these characters, of which I'll go into later. The acting in this film is pretty fantastic. Evans, like I said, is mostly known for Captain America, so he fits perfectly into this rebellious leader role. He's a very easy protagonist to follow throughout his journey from the tail end of the train to the engine to take down Wilford, played by Harris. He first leads his people to get Nam-gung, played by Song, who was one of the train's original engineers before turning into this junkie. He knows how to override the complicated system of locked doors, so that allows them to keep moving forward along the train. Their mission is somewhat complicated by Wilford's right-hand woman, Mason, played by a very Margaret Thatcher-esque Tilda Swinton. Curtis is joined by Edgar, played by Belle, Tanya, played by Spencer, and Nam-gung's daughter, Yona, played by An Sung-ko. Each actor plays their role almost perfectly, and each set adds their complexity. My main issue with this film is due to the execution of the film's theme, and I don't think it was done in the best way possible. Now, okay, I know that's very vague, but if I go into it, that's my spoiler section. So, in short, I don't think that makes the film bad by any means, and I think overall, Snowpiercer is a must-watch that surprises the viewer many times and really never gets boring. That's my review of the movie. Now I'm gonna dissect the film a little bit more, and this definitely is a spoiler-heavy section. So, if you definitely want to watch this film completely spoiler-free, I suggest you stop listening right now, and then go watch the film, and then come back and listen to it from here. Anyway, that is the spoiler warning. Now let's continue. So I want to dissect the film's meaning and why I don't think it was done perfectly. The way the film shows how the social structure inside the train mirrors our global society of classes was done extremely well. I really liked how the one end of society, essentially having tons and tons of money, living in penthouse with tons of space, the other end has the poor living in a very crowded space, whether in real life that be the hood, a favela, or the inner city. The rich are clearly living their best life at the top, and the poor remain on the bottom. Similar to the film, we all live in a confined space on planet Earth, yet we still have extremely divided societies. Joon-ho once said in an interview that in this film, he wanted to emphasize the idea of the train, the physical train as an iron box or metallic prison. The characters are all stuck inside, they say they want to move to the front, and they fight to get there. But it doesn't matter because they're ultimately still inside the train. And so I think that's a kind of an interesting way to show this, and comments on the film as a whole and the allegory that it has toward planet Earth. We keep fighting and fighting to either save the planet or not save the planet, but we're essentially going to destroy ourselves within it, but also destroying the place that we're in as well. And so that's a very interesting allegory to speak on. His film also references back to the Occupy Wall Street protests in 2011. Now, I'm not going to go into my political thought, but for those who either don't know or don't remember, these protests brought to the front line the huge disparity between the world's wealthiest 1% and the significantly less wealthy 99%, by showing that Wilford and his bodyguard slash maybe partner, being essentially the only people in the engine car, demonstrated that directly in comparison to the rest of the cars. Each car essentially had less and less people in comparison to the tail end of the car, which was extremely crowded. crowded. Furthermore, as Curtis and his team move through the car, the conditions start to look better and better. And I think this progression definitely applies to how the world is and how our society essentially can block out impoverished areas of the world even though they are some of the most densely populated. Similar to Parasite, this film shows how smaller and poorer people can make the rich ones better. The film even shows how a smaller creature in some ways makes even the poor people better. While this comparison I don't think is as obvious as the other ones, it seems that it was deliberate if you compare the lighting between that creature and the other ones operating the engine / the train. I also enjoyed the film's parallels to other world events such as throwing of the shoe at a world leader. Now I wanted to look more into this because I thought this was such an interesting thing because I remember a specific event, but I thought it was interesting to see that this is not just a one-time thing. Looking into this, I found out that this type of protest goes all the way back to 359 AD, where the Roman Emperor Constantius II was giving a speech from a small hill to a group of people asking for their loyalty. One of them shouted "Marha, Marha" and threw a shoe at him. And this is somewhat debated on historians if it actually did happen, but either way, this idea of how throwing shoes is a dirty thing and it's used in protests across many cultures and religions. Shoes aren't exactly held in high esteem as obviously they are dirty and are really beneath our feet. I think it's really interesting to think about that and how that applies to protests because when you look at other religions and cultures, specifically if you look at Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist cultures, if you enter their temple, you have to remove your shoes. Buddhist temples are absolutely forbid guests to point their feet at the representation of Buddha, but also do display a deep reverence for feet of deities. Buddha is often represented with a pair of intricately adorned feet or footprints, and there are some Hindus who worship a footprint believed to belong to the god Vishnu. And interestingly also, under traditional Jewish law, a host may have someone wash their guest's feet as long as the servant was not a Hebrew. And because of this, Christians have been shown as well to believe that Jesus intended to show humility and servitude to his disciple when he washed their feet at the Last Supper. Now, I can't say this bit for certain, but this may be why there's not as much hatred towards feet in the Christian world. Sorry about that shoe throwing history tangent, but I think that it is a quite interesting concept to think about. Anyway, back to the movie at hand. Real life parallel was how the engine was an obvious allegory of how a large part of the workforce in the past used a similar technique. Though less so now, this practice still exists, with the International Labor Organization claiming that there are about 152 million cases globally. Even more similar to real life is how poor people on the train are kept in order. There is this Marxist theory that states that the powerful must keep order by abiding to two key principles. One says that they must teach everyone to stick to the status quo. If you are born in a certain society, that is where you're going to stay forever. In the case of the film, that applies to the individual train cars. The acceptance of the status quo is shown being taught, aka brainwashing, to people at a very young age. It's also very interesting to show that this way also comments that hatred toward a certain population is taught and it is not genetic. The second ideal is for those in power will apply force if those ideas that they're trying to brainwash into people do not stick via the way of police officers or military forces, which this film shows. The latter is an escalation of the former if the rebellious keep pushing as they move across the train. Beginning of the movie, they start off fighting the train and they have poorer weapons. As they get further into the train and further along, they encounter more advanced weaponry and advanced personnel. Hence the fight scene with the night vision goggles. If you take away all of the class politics that this film has, it also attempts to tackle humans' potential to be headed toward extinction. And I think this is the theme that does not succeed as well. I think Wilford's idea of killing off people for the welfare of the train makes sense given the scenario that they are in. Now, before everyone gets all up in arms about this, let me explain. The film places the viewer in this world that has snow everywhere and humans cannot live outside of this train. Okay, fine. This train is apparently running 24/7, 365 on these railroad tracks, and each loop is 1 year. Okay, so my question then is who takes care of these tracks and maintains them to be operational? They never say in the film if the tracks are self-maintaining or if they're snow or ice proof. So people can say, okay, you have to suspend your disbelief. Okay, so then if you take all that away, then the only world that we are meant to think about is the train, not the world outside of it. Therefore, this is a closed space, which means that resources are very limited. If the population keeps on growing, they will either run out of space or they'll run out of resources. So killing off people makes sense. Again, let me explain. Let's say you're in a one-room apartment by yourself. Not a one-bedroom, a one-room meaning everything is in there, including your bathroom. Any food or whatever you would need would appear when you would need it. One person in this situation can make it pretty okay. It's not the most ideal situation, obviously, but you can make it work. You add another, it becomes a little bit more complicated, but it probably could be done as well. You just become very familiar with your roommate. You add another, and it starts to feel a little bit crowded. You keep adding people, and eventually you'll be standing shoulder to shoulder and chest to chest. The food and drink, however, would still only be enough for that one initial person. So eventually, you are going to have to start getting rid of people either by natural selection, i.e. living longer than the person standing next to you, or they're going to have to be more extreme actions. Now, I know this film is showing the disparity between the people in a limited space. So using my analogy, it's like the first person had half the room, no matter however many people joined, and then that first person got to decide how to manage that society. This is obviously wrong. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm saying is that in my analogy, each person would have an equal share in the space. This is where Wilford's idea of killing off people makes logical sense because it resets the equation and prevents extinction from happening. This is obviously very similar to
Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around. And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass.
If you've been following me on social media, I have just finished rewatching the Infinity Saga, and I feel his plan is very problematic and doesn't make sense. And in short, it shows that he doesn't think things through and really isn't as smart as he thinks he is. And yes, I get it's a villain and whatnot, but I can't really take him seriously if his mission is problematic. And let me go a little bit into that. So he wants to correct the galaxy by killing off half of the population because he says resources are finite. He then snaps his fingers, kills off half the population, then
He used the stones to destroy the stones.
Now, my question to the MCU is, did he change the amount of resources in the galaxy? No. All he did was prevent the inevitable. Resources are still finite, and it will be reached eventually. He may die off before this happens, but it's still going to happen eventually. His correction isn't a correction. It's a prolonging, and there's no way to reset the galaxy again when we get to that point because he got rid of the stones. So his logic makes absolutely no sense. And anyway, this is similar to Wilford's theory. It makes sense to a point. He can kill off these people, but the resources are still gonna go down. They even demonstrate this as some items on the train are quote-unquote going extinct. Maybe this film is trying to comment on how the disparity between the trains causes more problem than if everyone was allowed to move freely throughout the cars. But even if this was the case, the resources will still be finite and some things would have to happen. So the film then tries to say that humans should venture out and try to survive outside of the train. This idea has no guarantee that the people will survive, but it says that it is worth it to try even with an uncertainty. And the only way to fix the inequalities and disparities that we have is to destroy the very foundations of our society. We have to completely start over from two human beings reproducing. As shown in the film, most of the train's inhabitants die before the avalanche, either from killing one another or an explosion. Take that away. The train itself is already on its way out. Engine is failing. The system is corrupt and extinction is imminent. The train was not meant to be immortal, and really neither is humanity. Like Thanos, this film says a hard reset can fix all the problems of the world. However, even if it does that, resources are still finite. This is honestly the case with any type of expanding out. Resources are still going to be very limited. Survival is basically based on whomever can discover a new way to survive before another, and then the last one probably won't survive. Theoretically, we would then need another reset in the future somewhere else. So maybe I'm thinking thinking a little bit too much into this film, and maybe that's the point of it all. I do believe that films are meant to make people have discussions about them and their themes. My problem is that this film's secondary theme is extremely complicated when you actually analyze it. There's not really a simple solution, especially when it comes to humanity. While the film does give a somewhat ambiguous ending that will make viewers really question the survival of the human race, I don't think it has as strong as an impact as the primary classism theme. This is because there are still problems that could come up after we venture out of our train, aka planet Earth, to other planets. We don't know what resources are out there, and still that doesn't get rid of the idea that there's a finite amount. It really comes down to the survival with that finite amount of resources. You could make the argument that yes, with how big the overall galaxy is, that it's not finite, but it's still a limited amount of space. We just haven't discovered it yet. To venture out that far, essentially it would be changing who we are as humanity, but we would be then using those resources in those respective planets, but at each movement to another planet is essentially another reset. I don't think it gets rid of that idea and survival. And I think this is when natural selection would really come about. And I think when you really look at multicellular organisms and the science behind everything, we are destined to try to survive over one another. When you look at microbiology, multicellular organisms came from bigger cells engulfing smaller ones. That's why a cell has a nucleus, a mitochondria. Now, I'm not advocating for cannibalism here, because that's not what we should be doing. But this idea of survival of the fittest is not this new concept. The problem is that when someone says that some other population of people has a different amount of resources to survive on, they're essentially saying that they're allowed a 50-meter head start in a 100-meter race. But again, even if you separate the resources equally, this still brings up a very dark and pessimistic view of inevitable extinction of the human race. Because again, the resources are still finite no matter how many resets are done. So then, what is even the point of saying we shouldn't have the disparity between the train cars? Not saying I agree with that sentiment, but from a film story perspective, it doesn't make sense to be progressive on one end, but then also promoting this dark and pessimistic theme. I think the film could have benefited from a better execution of the secondary theme or not had it at all. I do feel that the film's first theme is extremely strong, but when it attempts to go after the more complex secondary theme, it doesn't precisely stick the landing. I will say the film does approach this theme well with Chris Evans. When the film was released in 2013, he has already been known as Captain America after playing the role in both 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger and the first Avengers movie in 2012. At this point, that's what we know him for. He's done other films such as Not Another Teen Movie.
Hungry?
I don't like Sundays.
Oh, it's not a Sunday. It's a banana split.
And the Fantastic Four.
Now picture that, but everywhere. What?
You guys are worse than NASA.
And plenty of other movies, but he's mostly known as Captain America. This film establishes him as this main protagonist that most will see him as a hero. The film does show that his character is not that simple, and the fact that he almost takes over for Wilfred in the end shows that the film is much more complicated than a simple little guy taking down the big guy's story. Again, as I said earlier before I went into the spoilers, I still feel that this film is very, very good, even with its missed secondary theme. As I've said, the first theme's execution was absolutely flawless. The acting was phenomenal. The direction was great, but I don't think it was as good as Parasite, and I definitely think it's worth watching if you haven't seen it already. Now, what did you think of the film? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. The Formal Review is on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Reddit. The URL is all the same. It's at The Formal Review. Please also subscribe to your podcast on your favorite service. It's on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, Podbeam, and really anywhere that you can find podcasts. Also, I'm always wanting to grow and improve, so feel free to leave a review. I see the numbers and I do this for you all, and I want to keep it entertaining. Let me know what you all thought of this holiday vote-in review session. I may continue this, but I want to know what you all think of it. Hit me up on social media and tell me. I also appreciate anyone who has supported me by listening, talking about movies. For those who have contributed financially, I'd really thank you all for supporting me in that way. For those who want to financially contribute, please go to anchor.fm/the-formal-review and click support this podcast. I thank you very much in advance, and really any donation is appreciated. Thank you all for tuning in once again, and until next time, well, I won't be seeing you at the movies, but be safe, wash your hands, and take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Formal Review. We hope you'll join us again.